The way we take care of ourselves is ever evolving. And what we know for sure is that our mind and spirit are linked to our physical body, and that our wellness seems to extend into our communities and the planet we all share.
It is very, very clear that wellness is interconnected.
We love spending time with you to explore and practice the breakthroughs, the insights, and the passions of incredible people helping us all see the world in a whole new light.
This is Health Gig.
So Tricia and I are especially excited today to be talking to Alden Stoner. And Alden Stoner is not only the visionary behind Nature Sacred, but she's also a friend. And so, Alden, welcome to Health Gig.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with you both.
Alden, as you know, we've been waiting to have you on Health Gig to talk all about this amazing organization that you lead. What should we know about it?
Yes. Thank you for this. And I'm really excited to be here to chat with you about Nature Sacred and the healing power of nature in general. And while I am currently the leader of Nature Sacred, I have to give credit where credit is due. The co-founders are my parents, and they're the real visionaries to bring this initial idea into the world. And it's the communities across the country. And I know we'll talk more about this, but these incredible leaders whom we call fire souls because they have the fire in their soul. They recognize the need for nearby nature and then to bring that to their communities. Really, it's about bringing people together to try and make a better world. I mean, I think that's really where we all are in this moment. We can find ourselves focusing on the fractures that we have, or we can find ourselves seeking out the joy and the healing and the hope. And that's really what Nature Sacred seeks to bring to the world.
So how does it do that? You integrate nature into urban spaces and community spaces. How do you do that?
So Nature Sacred has been around for over 25 years. We were originally a private grant-giving organization, and in 2020, we transformed into being an operating foundation because the need outpaced what two people could do. And frankly, when we did it, we didn't know if people would show up, and we didn't know if the market would meet us. And in fact, it has blossomed in so many ways, from donors, supporters, connectors, and then the increasing need for these green spaces. That was there before COVID, but I think COVID really changed people's attitudes and views towards nature in a permanent and positive way. What we do is we work with communities, and that can be urban neighborhoods, it can be hospitals, prisons, churches, synagogues, any institution or community group that comes together. And as I mentioned sort of about the fire soul, recognizes the need for that nearby nature and the role that nature can have in a healthy community. So many people can go out into nature, like national parks and things like that, but not everyone can, whether they're in an underserved community or in a hospital bed or whatever. The need for that local infusion of nature, you can really get the benefits in even 2 to 3 minutes. Optimal is about 20 minutes, but even in 2 to 3 minutes. Really, Nature Sacred is about partnering with communities to create these community-led, and the community is at the center of this because what we have found over 25 years is that people take care of that which they help create over and over again. That's what we've done, and we have over 100 sacred places across the country and growing.
So when you say there's benefits of being in nature, optimal is 20 minutes, but you can get the benefits between 2 and 3 minutes. What are those benefits? What is documented? What have you found happens when people get exposed to nature?
Really, we at Nature Sacred talk about ourselves as where the science meets the soul. And the science is really important and the soul is really important. So we'll talk about both of those. But on the science piece, when we started doing research in 2012, there was some research out there, but not a ton. Now you read about it on CNN, mainstream media, about the latest and greatest. But some of the critical pieces are that it can reduce heart disease, reduce burnout, which I think certainly some people have been feeling more acutely, but we've all experienced in the last few years. Even the Surgeon General's report around parents, and that came out a couple weeks ago, it can increase child birth weights, which is an important health indicator, and it can reduce gun violence by up to 29%. Pretty powerful statistics around relatively small interventions. So these parks don't have to be huge. They don't have to be wildly expensive. It's these small nature interventions that can have an outsized impact.
So, Alden, when we talk about these statistics and what happens when people are in nature, are those because they're relaxing? I mean, what is it that they're saying that is in nature that allows all these positive benefits?
I will speak from my perspective, and I'm not a scientist, but what we're seeing is that it dramatically reduces cortisol levels. And we are all experiencing, we're all sort of in this high octane cortisol timeframe, especially as we're getting pinged on our devices and all that stuff. Then, of course, the many, many stressors that all of us are feeling, and some much more than others. And so that's one of the key pieces around the burnout and the heart disease, things like that. There are loads of reports that we can sort of share out about some of the more specifics on why that might be. But think about, for example, each of you, and I invite our listeners to think about it just for a minute, of how you feel when you just sit for a second in nature. It doesn't even have to be super quiet, but you sort of see the sun dappling and maybe feel the breeze, and just what happens to your own body, to your own mind. And that's what gets amplified if you do it for a little bit longer and en masse, if you have more and more people doing that. And for us, in some ways, there's these really important statistics and the science piece, but going back to the soul piece, just think about if you emerge a little bit better, a little bit clearer, a little bit more relaxed from a sacred place to go about your day. And when somebody cuts you off in traffic, or something more egregious happens at work, or some stressful thing with your kid or whatever, how you might react better because you've had that moment or that interaction. And that the ripple effect of that for all the people you're interfacing with is really magnified.
And it is amazing, and I know we're going to talk about it, but Doro, when I visited with Alden in Georgetown, and we were there, and again, it's nature that's brought into maybe what otherwise doesn't have beautiful nature, right? Like it's just not. On the waterfront, it used to be, what was it before?
It was where all the
Sacred Place?
trucks were. So at Georgetown Waterfront Park, it's a beautiful park. And within that, there is a sacred place, this labyrinth. It's actually the only labyrinth inside a national park.
I've been there.
Yeah, that's about 22 years old. We actually celebrated the 20th anniversary a couple of years ago. Before it was this gorgeous park, it was where the salt trucks were and the salt piles, and it was no access to the waterfront. So all of that changed. We were a small part of that larger initiative for sure. But the idea of creating a contemplative space, and there's signage there that talks about the labyrinth and what happens to yourself and your body. And when Tricia and I were there for a couple of hours, like we witnessed so many people walking the labyrinth, and it was really fun.
And again, that idea that people don't have access to it. People inner city, as you said, people at the hospital, they can't get out into nature, and it's so healing. And as Alden said at the beginning, prisons. This is, again, it was helpful for me to see it, and Dora, you saw it, that what you do is actually incredibly physical, makes the space beautiful, but it's actually really good for the community's health. And it becomes a center. But why did you use the word sacred? Does that confuse people, or where did that come from?
Sacred, sometimes people wonder if it means religious, and it's for people with any religion or none. It isn't about that. It's about that sacred human nature connection. After all, we are nature. And what we've really found over particularly the last 200 years, as we've become more industrialized, we as humans have gotten further away and more removed from nature. And we as humans and the planet have gotten sicker. And the idea is that the closer we get together, and so by creating these small interventions and opportunities for people on a day-to-day basis to reconnect with nature and therefore reconnect with themselves, that we as humans and the planet can also become healthier. And we've certainly witnessed that from people from 8 to 88, it runs the gamut.
I'm kind of intrigued by what a nature sacred place would be like in a prison.
Same principles apply in the terms of it being a community-led engagement. And our first one was at Western Correctional Institute in Western Maryland. And it was really prompted by the warden there at the time. And that's bordering on 20 years old. And the warden then said, these are going to be your neighbors. And so we need to take care of these folks. And so that was the original impetus that they had. And we did a charrette, which is a design meeting essentially, that was the warden, the assistant warden, the chaplain, the head of security, I think. And then I think it was about 5 or so members of that prison. And they got around the table and sort of imagined what was sacred to them. And almost all of them talked about water, the healing powers of water, which comes up a lot in the sacred place design, no matter where you are in the world. The other thing that came up is the vulnerability there of being able to share what's happening in life on the outside and yet, wanting to process that in a way that feels safe. And so the landscape architects that we worked with there created something called the Well of Unspoken Truths and created a 20-foot sort of hole in the ground, small hole in the ground where people could write down, someone was married, someone passed away, or whatever, and put that there so that they could express it without anything sort of coming back to them. There is so much more that connects us as humans than divides us. Our human experience is the same. We all love, we all laugh, we all cry, and we all need to process these things and heal. And nature is the most universal thing of all. It really unifies and restores us.
You are an incredible storyteller. You are, Doro, you could sit and just to listen to Alden. I mean, she can just tell incredible stories. But tell us about your background. How did you find your way into this role as heading up this incredible organization?
There's the sort of obvious answer, which is that, my parents started this organization. So I was involved in different ways over time. I also served on the board a number of years ago for about 10 or 15 years almost, actually. While that was going on, I was out in Los Angeles and working in the world of storytelling. I'm incredibly passionate because it's the stories we tell that can inspire us to become more than we even think possible. And those are the stories that I'm particularly interested in. It's part of the training that I had there. I worked for a period of time at the now shuttered but participant media. The whole idea was entertainment that inspires and compels social change. And so I was really leading a group to create social change around stories. And so have brought that ethos to the work of the nonprofit space, which I think in general struggles with telling stories well. And yet that's what we do. We as a sort of sector help change lives, transform societies, and really create systems change. But unless you can communicate that well in a compelling, inspiring, and exciting way, it's harder to do that. One of the things that I always found so fascinating is if you have data only versus story only, versus data plus story, the thing that actually changes people's hearts and minds the most is story only.
Oh, so it is the story. It's the heart.
Everyone's had a similar experience, so you can relate to one another. Is that what bench talk is?
Very much so, Doro, actually. Yeah. So in every sacred place, there is a portal, a path, a destination, and a sense of surround. And because they're community-led, each one looks different and shows up differently in a sacred place. But the one thing that's the same is our signature nature sacred bench. And tucked underneath that bench is a little yellow waterproof journal. And we have been collecting journal entries for over 25 years, thousands and thousands of them. And people write about love and loss and gratitude and grief. They talk about the profound. They talk about, they do doodles. It really runs the gamut. But for me, these journals are my why. When you sit down and you read something about how someone came that day and sat there and wasn't expecting to have a transformative experience, but writes about and then says, oh, I'm realizing that I need to clean myself up so that I can see my child again. I remember reading this one particularly. It was a 3-page entry. That's my why for doing this work and for so many of us, because it's those interventions. There's the science piece, and then there's the story of how you've just created an opportunity. We didn't do very much in that. The person did most of the work there, but just creating that opportunity. And so we've had these and shared them out in different ways on social media and things like that. But in 2020, when our country and our world was so fractured and hurting in so many, many ways, I wanted to create something that was inspiring and highlighting that connection that we all share, that sort of common humanity, and offer glimmers of hope, because there is so much beauty and love and hope out there. It's about turning your attention towards it. Bench Talk is really a book that we put out and we have a limited edition that has like seed paper and all that to sort of put nature in your hands. And then there's also a paperback, but it's a collection of only about 200 of the thousands of journal entries. So just going through that process was both a beautiful journey and a challenge because we wanted to share so many. But the idea is that this can be a piece of inspiration, an opportunity to lift yourself up or share some excitement and inspiration with others. It's one of my personal passion projects, and it seems to be resonating with audiences. Thank you.
Even just the time that we were in Georgetown, as you said, there were people there. We saw them sitting on benches, people thanking Alden for this opportunity. I mean, sometimes we just take it for granted in our world, and it's such a gift. And giving people that opportunity to share and be heard through Bench Talk and through the journals is incredible.
The day we were there, Tricia, this young woman walked the labyrinth, and then we joined her afterwards and sort of walked at the same time because you can have multiple people walking at the same time. And as we exited, she started talking to us. We were just two humans, walking with us. She didn't know anything about us. And she said, "Gosh, this place is such a gift." And I was just so happy, but quietly, and she's like, "Do you know who this is?"
I introduced her.
That's the ball game, If we can help people in just little ways, it's the nudges, I think, that really ultimately are a part of systems change, but it's hard to pinpoint.
Do you have any specific success stories that you could share with us of people who've experienced a sacred space and their life has changed?
There are, on some level, too many to count. And so many of them we find in the journal entries. I will share one in this moment, which is that we have a sacred place, actually a couple of them, at a shelter for those experiencing homelessness in Memphis. And we went to the grand opening of this facility. It had already been open for a couple of weeks, but the event happened. And we walked in, and there was this young woman behind the desk. And I just said hello. And, "What's your favorite place?" And she said, it's the staff garden. So in this place, there is a sacred place for those residents or clients experiencing homelessness. There is one that's open to the public that's at the plaza, so anyone can come and stay there. And then there's one just for the staff. And so she took us back into the staff garden, which was the first time I had seen it because our designers and team had, but I hadn't seen it yet. And she said, "This is my oxygen mask." She said, "Every day, my job is to help those either get identification or, whatever services they need. And it's hard. That's hard work. It's hard for the residents and clients too, but it's hard to even be on the phone for an hour and a half trying to, get through to Social Security or whatever the case may be." And she said, "I look out at that garden and I say, that's where I'm going next." And she said, "And I go out after, one of these interactions." And she said, "And that's how I continue on." That's a small intervention, but again, people who are helping others at scale and supporting those is big. Yeah.
And that's why we talk about, when we sat down and talked about this, it would be great to have it in more workplaces. Doro, even in our little world, it's great when we would gather. It'd be awesome to have a place to go and sit in nature, when we're in the office.
Of course, I'd love to see is from a systems change perspective, both from developers and then also from hospitals, because those are workplaces as well, is that at least in the hospital setting, there's the boardroom, there's the MRI machine, there's the emergency department, and there's a sacred place that becomes sort of structured into new hospital development. Similarly, on either new or revitalized office spaces, and I think there's a lot of revitalization going on, so a huge opportunity for workers, decision makers, and developers to think through these both as programmatic and retention opportunities as well as continual improvements. People have been talking about nature as an amenity for a long time. I think in COVID that shifted to not just a necessity, but essential. And so we have, I think, moved from a time of, and particularly at Nature Sacred, needing to sort of convince people that nature is a good idea or a sacred place is a good idea. Now it's more about prioritization. People, by and large, bought into the idea that, gosh, they feel better, that makes sense. So now it's about prioritizing that. The creation of a sacred place as opposed to just a garden or a landscaped area. And what we bring that's unique is that engagement piece. And then back to what I said before, that people take care of that which they help create when someone's involved in the decision making and the visioning and all of that, then you're invested and you want to stay and be helpful and do all that. And we have seen that time and time again. And then also from a corporate setting, people can do other things like encourage people to take walks or take their meetings outside, things like that. And we do a lot of that at Nature Sacred. And in fact, one of the things we started doing last year is putting 20 minutes a day as like a part of timesheets. You're not penalized if you don't do it, but we encourage it so that it's at least a piece of it. And again, these sort of nudges really can be helpful. And the metrics, the sort of other research about these things in the workplace is that it increases productivity, it increases creativity, it decreases sick days. That's an important thing for a business leader and decision maker, from an economic perspective, as well as wellness for their employees.
And something else that we've explored too is talking about how joy can be infused. Doro, she's like a joy person, like allowing people to get into nature. There's just joy. And then incorporating joy into my being, into my work, into my relationships, that kind of thing.
We really try to be intentional about living the mission in a lot of different ways, because the more those things get integrated, it also gets pollinated to other people. And so we talk a lot about how joy is our guide as an organization. And
Doro loves that. She's our joy person.
Joy person. Yay. But joy is our guide for who we partner with, how we partner, how we even create the framework for a charrette. That needs to be at the center, because that elicits a whole other thing. And it doesn't mean that you don't talk about the hard things. You can and do need to talk about the hard things. But if you do that centered in joy or centered in gratitude and trying to be solutions oriented, which is what we're fully committed to, it really does change the conversation. And yeah, speaking of gratitude, so we changed actually this year our annual report to name it our gratitude report, because that's what it is. It's gratitude for our donors. It's gratitude for our connectors. It's gratitude for our fire souls. That is really what is at the undercurrent of all of this. And there's a whole host of research that I'm not fully schooled on, but I know I've seen it in mass media about how if you center things in gratitude, it again shifts your thinking, shifts how you believe you're living your life. And it really does take a village to do any of these things. That's the premise really of a sacred place. And it's about bridging divides too. People from all different walks of life, all different political beliefs, everything can agree on beauty and nature and coming together. And at a time when that can be hard to find, we certainly are trying to do our part in having nature be a guide for all of us.
What are the biggest challenges Nature Sacred faces in creating and maintaining green space, and how do you address them?
It's really about getting buy-in at the highest level. And within an organization, that means at the highest level of an organization, when it's a community group, it's about getting buy-in from a variety of different stakeholders, because you want that connection to take place. And, as I said, I think people are generally bought into the idea that nature is important, but it's the prioritization at this point. We put together a healthcare calculator for hospitals. It's really simple. There's only 4 inputs, and you can demonstrate how much you can reduce your bottom line by having even a small sacred place, because it reduces burnout, and therefore it reduces mistakes, and therefore it reduces legal fees and all kinds of things. The hope is that those kinds of data pieces are helping to reprioritize things for decision makers. And if that's true in hospitals, that's also true in corporate settings and others. On the community side, it's really about sustainability. And what I mean by that is you have a fire soul usually who's at the onset, but then when they age out or they move or something else happens, that succession planning. I will say organically, in most of our sacred places where leadership has taken place, they have identified the next leader. We at Nature Sacred, as I mentioned earlier, have created the National Fire Soul Network. So this is a grouping, a collection of these fire souls. We bring them together, then we stitch them together. We have affinity groups and education and leadership support and mental health support and enrichment and enhancement grants. But one of the things that we do is we put together program guides and other opt-in programming. And so we're working right now on the succession planning piece of that and sharing out some best practices that we've experienced, because when people do that seamlessly, and we do have, most of our sacred places are 10, 15, 20 years old and thriving. I would say maybe a third or so have gone through leadership transition, period. of which almost all of them have been successful.
Tell us about the fire souls. I mean, this is so vibrant. This is incredible. This is the souls. Yeah, explain them. And this is
What are they? I don't know.
It's amazing. As you're talking, Alden, we get it. There's a place that people can go. We're bringing nature to where it really needs to be. But now all of a sudden there's a heartbeat that's always there. It's always there. So tell us about the heartbeat.
They are the heartbeat of the sacred place because we went back in 2016, 2017 and did a review of our sort of 40 or so of our sacred places and did an assessment and said, what makes these better than these or, more vibrant? And the answer every time was the existence of a strong fire soul, because a strong fire soul then programs the space, takes care of the space, makes sure that there's maintenance plan,
and
etc.
So a fire soul is a
All
leader.
volunteers. It's a leader. It's a community leader.
Okay.
And they recognize they are the ones who have the fire in their soul.
Yes.
They're really at the forefront of it. And then they are the stewards over the long haul. And we recognize that those positions can sometimes be quite lonely. And they can feel alone, like they're doing it all on their own. And these are incredibly important people to the fabric of America. I mean, these are people who are on the ground, who are delivering vital services to their community. In 2020, we realized that about 80% of our fire souls are frontline workers. These are folks who need other supports. And so that's when we created the Fire Soul Network to help support them as individuals as well as their sacred place. So offering those mental health and leadership and all kinds of things for them so that they don't feel so alone. I wish I had the quote perfectly, but one of our fire souls, Pastor Michael from Stillman or Peace Park, he went to his first fire soul event and he said, oh my gosh, I had no idea that there was this community and here you are right here. And this is the first place I want to go when I need support or need something. And he was brought to tears in that moment. I'm sort of broadly quoting him, but yeah.
So these are gatherings of fire souls to exchange ideas and support each other for their spaces that they're maintaining and that kind of thing.
Yes, yes. And we get some of the best ideas from the fire souls and share them out. So we have a lot of programming guides that are offered. For example, in hospitals, one of our hospitals does stargazing at night for the nurses who are on the night shift, right? And just 5 or 10 minutes that they get. They don't get much, but that's an opportunity. And so we've shared that out. There are labyrinth walks and best practices around there. We have a lot of community farming sacred places. And so we did a community farming tour last year with our Baltimore and Washington folks. And I think it was a 4-hour event. And they were like, can we just be together more? And that's what we keep getting asked, is to bring us together more often for more even unstructured time. And of course, time is our most precious resource, but it's also a great resource for these fire souls. And so that's part of what we do.
What are some of the future goals and initiatives that are coming up right ahead of you right now?
As I mentioned, when we made the shift in 2020 from a private grant giving to an operating foundation, so it had taken about 20 years to create 100 sacred places. We had a really ambitious goal to put another 100 in the pipeline by 2025. And I am so excited to say that we are ahead of pace.
Wow. That's
we have 83 in the pipeline, of which about 25 are opening, and we have a series that are opening this fall. There's just more and more popping up, from Lincoln, Nebraska to Fresno, California, from Baltimore to Washington to Buffalo, New York. It really runs the gamut.
How do you know it's a sacred space when you go to one of these spaces?
We designate it as a sacred place once a fire soul has engaged us or a community leader has engaged us. And so then we go through this process. So what makes a sacred place is that the 4 sort of guiding principles is they're open and welcoming to all people. They're nearby. They're where people live, work, play, and heal. They're sacred. And what that means is they're designed for that contemplation, and they're community led. And it's the community that determines what's sacred to them. One of my favorite examples of that is Kirby Lane Park in Baltimore. When we were first working with them, we said, yeah, this is a sacred place for you. And they sort of were a little skeptical at first. And this was a grayed out, it was a former house that had been taken down. It was sort of a grayed out zone. And they said, well, we really love to play horseshoes. We said, great, well, let's have a horseshoe pit. So there's this gorgeous serenity mural that they determine in this sort of serenity garden. They have a stage in the back of this open, now sacred place and lot where they have musical events. They've even have graduations for returning citizens. And they have this horseshoe pit and they do this horseshoe contest. And that's what was sacred to them. And that's great. And that's how you get that engagement and really continue that on.
So meeting the needs of the people that are in that specific community.
And in the design process, or the other designations of what makes it a sacred place, is there's a portal, as we mentioned, to know that you've entered a new space. There's a path to meander and let your thoughts meander. There's a destination to focus your attention, and there's a sense of surround. Because when we have that sense of surround, this goes back to our early biological days and answers sort of the research question, your cortisol levels drop because you know there's nothing behind you, right? There's just sort of this, everything's going to be okay in that moment. And so those are the 4 design features plus the nature sacred bench that makes something a sacred place. You know, each place is unique, but the feeling is universal.
How important to you, Alden, and I think it's very important, are partnerships and collaborations? Because you're not doing, as you said earlier on, you're not doing this alone, obviously. You're working with people that share your vision and you're helping them get the vision that's theirs, that you just described. So how important are collaborations and partnerships?
It's absolutely essential. And it's about, as I mentioned, sort of bridging those gaps within communities and bringing people together. And so the more we have found time and time again that the more folks you have around the proverbial table giving input, the more exciting and the longer lasting those can become. And again, that doesn't mean there aren't things that come up or disagreements about how things should be, you know, but having those joy-centered conversations, but real honest collaborations actually unlock something greater. And my father wrote a book several years ago called Open Spaces, Sacred Places. And one of the chapters, one of the fire souls talked about how he wasn't too keen at the front end of bringing other folks to the proverbial table. And he said, but now that we're on the other side of it, I see that this is so much better, so much more powerful, so much healthier for the community. And so bumpy roads leads to beautiful places. So it's not always bumpy. It's usually not, but it can be. And that is part of the journey too. That's where the real healing happens. And we center everything around healing centered engagement from, you know, our staff to our work out in the field to our work even with donors. You know, it's so much actually, particularly with donors, it's something that has happened to them or has been absent for them. And they come to this work in that way. And it can really be powerful. And kintsugi, I don't know if you guys know the Japanese term kintsugi, this idea of kintsugiing your heart back together.
How has nature sacred influenced your own relationship with nature and how you approach your health and well-being? And also I'm interested in how your parents, their relationships to nature as well, and what got this going for them.
You know, my parents both grew up in Iowa, where there was a lot of green and a lot of nature. And then they moved to Maryland, to Annapolis, but very close and often in DC or Baltimore, where they were sort of met with something altogether different. They experienced the Chesapeake Bay and realized that not all communities here have certainly access to the water, but also just access to green space. And at the time, my father was the co-founder of American Tower, which is a cell phone tower company and allows these devices that connect us in so many ways, but also disconnect us. And they sort of recognized that and that there was sort of an underbelly to that. And so it's really up to us as sort of our own change agents to both use those with intention for good and then also sort of balance that out with nature. That was the original idea of creating a sacred place, is finding a place of solace and offering it to communities that didn't otherwise have it. For me, you know, obviously I grew up around this and nature has been a core part of my upbringing. And I feel so grateful for that and know that that's a privilege. And on the personal side, when I was going through some pretty extensive challenges trying to start a family, I turned to nature as part of my healing process. And one of the things I did actually on my own accord after I had left participant was I wanted to do a short film about one of our fire souls from Joplin, Missouri, where there had been the deadly tornado. When I went out to do that filming, this work got into the fabric of my being in a very different way. It wasn't something just that my parents had done. It was something that was core to me. And I was witnessing just heroism in big and small ways amongst these fire souls. I mean, it is incredibly hard, incredibly inspiring, and incredibly profound what community leaders across the country do. And so to be a part of amplifying that in whatever way I could was really great. And just sort of as it turns out, the weekend that we went to do this shoot in Joplin, I found out that I was pregnant with my now son. So the motherhood and the nature sacred getting into a different level of me happened at the same time. It's not when I became CEO, but it is when my soul shifted towards this work. On another sort of personal note, my father and our co-founder passed away last year. He was in a hospital here in Annapolis where my parents helped create a sacred place almost 25 years prior, having no knowledge that that's, where Dad would be. And on one of the hardest days of my life, between a hospice meeting and a palliative care meeting, you're in there and it's labyrinthine, and the smells and the sounds and the lights and all of that is just suboptimal for the human experience, even though these are places where we're going to heal. And I went down to the sacred place to have a call, and within 1 minute, I was able to drop in. And now it's this gorgeous place with these huge trees, and these things take time. Gardens take time. To seed something, both from an idea into a reality, takes time. But boy, when you do, what a gift it is for yourselves, the next generation, and all of that. And if I didn't believe this before, boy, on that day, it couldn't have been more profound for me.
What can individuals do to get involved in organizations to support Nature Sacred? How can everybody come around and help out?
Well, if there is a location in your neighborhood that you could see being a sacred place, we encourage you to talk to the neighbors or find out who owns that land or what have you. That's a possibility. On our website at naturesacred.org, there's a place where you can become a fire soul. So some folks might want to be in the fire soul community. So many of our new sacred places come from people who say, oh, this is an organization I care about, that I know those clients or those community members could benefit from a sacred place, and they connect us with them, and we take them through that process. So just sort of connecting us to organizations that say yes to the idea, that is really helpful. And then, of course, becoming donors and supporters of this work. I mean, there is, as I said, there are 83 projects in the pipeline and 17 more on the periphery coming just between now and the end of next year. So there is real need across the country in lots of different ways. People can get involved at every level that they're moved to. Share out about this work, because really, practicing it yourself is an important piece of it, and then sharing out the work and the importance of this work.
Well, we'll have all of that important information in our show notes, but I think it would be fun to circle back to bench talk. And are there some entries from that we could end on that you could read?
That would be a joy for me. Thank you. And I have a couple. This one is from the sacred place at Waterworks Park here in Annapolis, actually, where I am. Here, nothing matters. Those trees, these turtles, they don't care about politics. They don't worry about how they're going to pay their bills. They're just free. None of it matters. No one cares. And while we're here, we get to feel that too, even if just for a minute. Before we get back to our day-to-day routines, we need to remember to take a step outside of ourselves and breathe, if only for a minute. I love that one. Just thinking about the turtles who don't care about your social media presence or what's happening politically or whatever. And it just dials you into a totally different place. Then there's this one. This is at the Healing Garden at Anne Arundel Medical Center in Annapolis. Hi, my name is Cecilia, and I'm 9 years old. I'm here for a CAT scan, and I feel scared. But this is a pretty garden, and it makes me feel better.
That is very moving. I'm over here weeping.
So beautiful.
Well, here, I'll change pace for a second.
Okay, good.
And this one's from the Naval Cemetery Landscape in Brooklyn, New York. It's one of our most prolific places for journal entries. They are from all languages, all walks of life. Eat ice cream in moderation, but do eat ice cream. Be good to yourself and the rest will follow.
Oh, that's so sweet.
This is the last one I'll share, and this is from the Brenton Arboretum in Dallas Center, Iowa. It does my heart so much good to read the entries in this journal. The world is full of good people. Each of us sits alone on this bench as we write, but we aren't alone. Not really. We're all here together. We are a community. We are alike in our love for this place. We are bound together by sharing our thoughts, hopes, love, and peace in this journal. You and me, we're kindred spirits. And I know we're kindred spirits, and I'm sure the people listening are kindred spirits too. So think about, imagine what we could all do together. It's really exciting.
So exciting. Alden, thank you. This has been an incredible conversation, and thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for including us into learning more about it.
Oh, it's a great privilege and honor. Thank you both so much. And thank you for all you're doing to share out about a world with more well-being and love.
Thank you for joining us on Health Gig. We loved having you with us. We hope you'll tune in again next week. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast and follow us on healthgigpod.com. I'm Tricia.
And I'm Doro.
Be well.